Toyota Gazoo Racing are the home favourites. They'll be looking to repeat last month's success at Silverstone in the first round of the FIA World Endurance Championship season. They took the first and second spots and are at the top of the leaderboard.
This minute was brought to you by Rolex.
Your top stories coming up shortly on Good Morning Europe.
Welcome back to Good Morning Europe. A reminder of the main story today. The EU says it remains open but still unconvinced over Boris Johnson's Brexit proposals. Leaders across the bloc are calling for more clarity on how to break the deadlock on the Irish border. And the UK Prime Minister is also trying to shore up support at home, where he'll need support from across the Commons if his plan is to pass. France is still in shock after a knife attack at the police headquarters in Paris yesterday. An investigation has been opened into what happened after a man who worked in the technology department at the city's police headquarters stabbed and killed 4 colleagues before being shot dead. Euronews correspondent Annelise Borges joins me now live from Paris. Morning to you, Annelise. An inquiry has been launched by the police to look into it. Can you tell us about how that's developing?
Good morning, Rosie. Well, indeed, we know that police spent quite a few hours yesterday carrying out a long and extensive raid at the assailant's home, and we now know more details about his identity. A man named Michael Arpon, aged 45, who used to work inside the building you see behind me, the National Police headquarters, for the past 20 years, who was, quote, a model employee, and on this Thursday carried out that vile attack. His wife has been taken into custody, and some of his personal belongings, including his computer and his phone, are now being analyzed. But for the moment, as we speak, there's not clear indication as to why he did what he did, why he entered this building on Thursday at around noon and started stabbing his colleagues, killing 4 people inside the National Police headquarters. We understand that the Paris prosecutor's office is now involved in this inquiry, and that means that the National Anti-Terrorism Unit is also participating in this investigation to determine whether or not terrorism was involved.
Clearly, this has been quite shocking. What kind of reaction has there been from France?
Well, Rosie, in view of the level of violence that was perpetrated here yesterday and the many questions that are still unanswered, France is indeed in shock. It is easy to see why, but this was a particularly difficult day, a particular tragic incident for police officers. Just the day before, thousands of them were taken to the streets here in Paris to denounce worsening working conditions that are pushing them over the edge. 20,000 police officers from all over France came to join a march to denounce the despair and the stress among police officers that are pushing them to take their own lives. Over 50 suicide cases were registered among police forces so far this year. That is an extremely high rate. And now what they are certainly not expecting is that one of their own would perpetrate such an act of violence against them.
Annelise Borges, our correspondent live in Paris. Thank you. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo arrives in North Macedonia later today to discuss the Balkan nation's potential NATO membership. The visit comes shortly after the country renamed itself following a long-running dispute with Greece. The issue was a stumbling block to its aspiration to join the military alliance. But is North Macedonia ready for NATO in other respects? And is NATO ready for North Macedonia? Well, we're joined now by Jamie Shea from the Friends of Europe think tank, who's also a former NATO spokesperson. Thank you for your time this morning. There's no doubting the fact that North Macedonia are very keen to join NATO. But we had that controversial issue over their name change. Aside from that, what other issues need to be addressed first?
Well, the name change is obviously a good sign that even the most intractable problems in the Balkans can be solved with some inspired political leadership and the support of the international community. And that is also a good sign for places like Kosovo, with the difficult relationship with Belgrade and Serbia, of course, that if Greece and North Macedonia can put the hatchet of conflict to rest, then other places in the Balkans, including Bosnia, can do so as well. But it's also a good sign that North Macedonia has now been invited to join NATO, and the process of accession is well underway. About half of the NATO countries have ratified the accession so far, and by the early next year, I believe the rest should have done so as well.
What about the US's perspective on this? Do you think they're looking for new countries that they might deem a little bit more biddable?
Well, I think it's great that the Secretary Pompeo is visiting the region because it's a sign of US re-engagement. Rosie, you remember 20 years ago, during the time of the Balkan conflicts, the US was very much in the lead with people like Ambassador Richard Holbrooke, leading the peace negotiations. But you could argue that perhaps over the last 20 years, US attention has slipped somewhat, with the focus, of course, after 9/11 on the Middle East. So it's very good at a time when other countries like Russia and China are competing for influence in the region, that Pompeo's visit shows that the US wants to be back in the game. And indeed, Secretary Pompeo has nominated one of his most sort of trusted advisors, an Assistant Secretary of State called Matthew Palmer, to be the US new special envoy for the region. So it really does show that the US wants to be part of it. And I think for the stability of the region, working with the EU to solve the outstanding issues, again, that's a positive step forward.
What would be the potential areas that maybe needed to be navigated more closely? Any areas of controversy? For example, maybe would this have a difficult impact on terms of relationships with Russia if North Macedonia joined NATO?
Well, yes, indeed, Russia ostensibly, but with some evidence, tried to interfere in the referendum that North Macedonia held on NATO membership, which passed overwhelmingly, but it has to be said, with a small turnout of the population. And then during the recent election campaign, and we saw in North Macedonia what we've seen elsewhere in Europe, the bots, the fake news campaigns, the attempts to polarize opinion. And I think that for the United States and perhaps for the European Union as well was a bit of a wake-up call that the region isn't necessarily automatically falling into the Western lap as we might have anticipated 10 or 20 years ago. As I said, Russia, China, with its One Belt, One Road investments, are competing for influence as well. And therefore, it's important that the US show that it cares, that it's back in the game.
Thank you for speaking to us, Jamie Shea, former NATO spokesperson and also from Friends of Europe think tank. Still to come here on Good Morning Europe.
How could a landmark ruling affect what you see on the platform? That's after the break.
Angola is Africa's best kept secret. Angola is the warmth of a friendly face. It's the intrigue of its history. Angola is a land of stunning contrasts. The best of the old and the new. It's the energy of a moving city. It's the rhythm of its nightlife, the magic of its culture, the taste of its diverse foods. Angola is opening its doors to the world. Angola is now.
Your top stories coming up shortly on Good Morning Europe.
This week on Euronews.
Delizia d'Amore, staged as a western from the 1940s, Rolando Villazon turns Donizetti's comedy into a cowboy movie set. The extra Nemorino's passionately in love with the movie star Adina. Plenty of action and rousing melodies at the Opera Leipzig in this edition of Musica on Euronews and Euronews.com.
Musica is proudly presented by Rolex.
Welcome back to Good Morning Europe. Now, a landmark ruling against Facebook by Europe's top court could affect what you see when scrolling through your timeline. Sean in the Cube can explain.
Well, it all started with an Austrian female politician. In 2016, she saw a post that was deemed defamatory, but Facebook didn't take it down at the time. But a ruling that has just happened yesterday by the European Court of Justice changes all of this, because it means that if a post is illegal in a member state, then they will have to take it down. But there are many caveats to this. So let's just break down what that ruling said. If content is illegal based on a member state's laws, then Facebook will have to take it down. And it depends on that member state, whether that is taken down geo-blocked, so whether it's just within that member state, or globally. So it could affect globally what you see on the platform. And then Facebook will have to monitor for equivalent posts. To get more on this, we spoke to Nicolas Guggenberger. He's the Director General of Yale's Information Society, and this is what he told us.
Now, the problem is that if you apply all these standards not only within the respective member state, but if you allow a court to basically define the content of the global network, that means that that particular member state can set the libel rules, the defamation rules that they deem appropriate for their jurisdiction, for the entirety of the network, and that is a global level. And that's what's a bit problematic.
So there are nuances and points of debate. First of all, Facebook will have to adhere to all member states' laws. And many feel that Facebook would have to choose the most strict laws as their bar, as their setting standard. But also, if a post is deemed illegal in one member state, then why would it be removed from all member states? So that's where that freedom of speech comes in. But also then, what does equivalent posts mean? What happens if you change a full stop for an exclamation point? We spoke to Facebook after that ruling, and in a statement they said that that ruling undermines the long-standing principle that one country does not have the right to impose its laws on speech on another country. They said that it opens the doors to obligations being imposed on internet companies to monitor content and so on. So what's crucial here is that there are debates, there are caveats with how to monitor platforms on the internet.
Thank you for that, Shauna. Let's take a look at some of the day's other stories. Ursula von der Leyen, the incoming president of the European Commission, is planning to live in the Commission's Brussels headquarters. The former German defence minister will use a 25-square-metre room next to her 13th floor office in the Bellemont building. Von der Leyen's spokesman said the move would save money, despite her earning over €300,000. Giuseppe Pigattoni, one of Italy's leading anti-mafia prosecutors, has been appointed president of the Vatican Court. It comes days after 5 senior officials in the city-state were suspended in an investigation into alleged financial wrongdoing. Pigattoni's investigations have led to the arrest of hundreds of mafiosi. A large canvas by the artist Banksy, depicting MPs as chimps in the British House of Commons, has sold for a record €11 million. It had been expected to go on for around €2 million. The artist wrote on Instagram, "Record price for a Banksy painting set at auction tonight. Shame I didn't still own it." Coming up here in the next half hour on Good Morning Europe, we look at the pressure on Greece as there are a rising number of migrants arriving from Turkey. And also uncovering secrets hidden in the scrolls. Researchers are excited to reveal 2,000-year-old Roman library, long since thought to be lost forever. All of that to come, but first a no comment from London, where some UK-based artists have given their response to Brexit.